Right, so he's talking about, kind of messed up with the time now. Okay, that's good. That's okay. That can happen to all people. That sometimes time is not necessarily our friend. To put it that. And yes, so the documentary "What Is a Woman" by Matt Walsh. I haven't watched it myself, but it seems like it's getting popular and controversial, of course. Have you seen it, by the way?
I haven't, no. I have seen it recommended on YouTube, I think yesterday to me, but I haven't watched it.
Right. I have seen a trailer and some clips here and there, and it's basically him asking the very basic question: what is a woman? To people, because the transgender movement has emptied the meaning of the term woman, so they can't really tell what a woman is. So it's very interesting. He's going to people on women's marches asking, what is a woman? And they can't answer him. But, I mean, you're in a women's march fighting for women's rights. How can you fight for the rights of someone you can't even define? It becomes absurd. And he asks sort of gender experts and all sorts of people, and it reveals the insanity of their ideology, really. So perhaps I'm going to watch it sooner or later. We'll see, but it seems very interesting and revealing. And yes, he also mentioned Alfred Kinsey. So for those who don't know, Alfred Kinsey, he's this sexologist, I think it's called, in the 1940s, 1950s, writing about the sexuality of males and females, human males and females. And he is notorious for promoting this sexual liberation agenda. That, we shouldn't have these conservative norms that people used to have back in the day about sexuality. People should be free, basically, and he was very instrumental in bringing about the sexual revolution in the 60s, which promoted all sorts of deviations from traditional sexual morality and things like not only fornication but also homosexuality and contraception and other things. And his experiments was very evil and wicked. And he was very notorious and extremely. His experience had very dark aspects. So perhaps that would be a topic for another conversation about Kinsey. But I can mention there is a video on YouTube by Judith Reisman. She's deceased now. She has done a lot of research into exposing Kinsey and his experiments. There's a video on YouTube where she talks about the very wicked experiments, sexual experiments he did to establish his, quote, science, which influenced the sexual revolution. He's considered the father of the sexual revolution, I think. When it comes to the Vatican's Novus Ordo, that's referring to the heresies and liberalism happening in the Vatican today, which is a huge problem. People who claiming to be the Catholic Church, but they are not actually the Catholic Church, but rather heretics to be. We are imposters. So, yeah.
Great. It's great that you knew all three of these things. I didn't know one of them. So that's quite glad that you could help out there. Yeah, I mean, interesting point about Jordan Peterson would certainly agree that there is definitely a dark side to this sexual revolution, because he talks a lot about how just pleasure without responsibility and without limit is a very bad thing for human beings, and it messes them up. And so I guess that's just an interesting kind of connection that I could make to your mentioning that this Alfred Kinsey was kind of a dark character. And yeah, about your point of this group or structure of heretics and people who are not Catholic kind of infiltrating the Vatican, that's interesting, because there would be an important question, which perhaps is also a question for a separate discussion. What then defines someone as being a Catholic? Because I have once watched a video about logical fallacies, And one of the logical fallacies is called not a true Scotsman. And the idea is somebody says, well, all Scottish people, I don't know, wear this weird robe that Scottish traditional clothing is. And then somebody replies, well, that's not true. I am a Scot and I don't wear this robe. And then the other person just says, well, you are not a real Scot. You are somehow. And through that argument, you can always save your position, but it's kind of we need some kind of objective criteria to know who is a Catholic and who isn't, because else you can just kind of change it as it fits your argument.
So a Catholic is a person who has fidelity to Catholic teaching, who follows and accepts and embraces all the teachings of the Catholic Church without exception. And heretic is one who would deviate from the faith, even on just one point. And sadly, what we see with all these so-called cardinals and so-called bishops in America, in Europe, even in Norway, everywhere, and also in the Vatican, that they are promoting heresy, which contradicts what the Catholic Church has always taught. Even with Francis, who many people think is the Pope, even he has actually promoted the heresy. He is now accepting other religions, saying that other religions, in the differences between different religions, we see the richness of different ways of coming to God. That was his words. But that is, of course, a very notorious heresy, and even blasphemy, because there's only one way to God, that is Jesus Christ in the Catholic faith. So he doesn't follow traditional teaching, so he would actually be an anti-pope, that is one who claims to be pope, but is not validly elected. Because to be a valid pope, you have to be a Catholic and a member of the church, but one is not a member of the church who doesn't follow Catholic teaching. So thus the true position is called sedevacantism, the position that the papal chair is actually vacant for the moment. So there's a huge backstory about how this came to be and all, but that is a brief presentation of these things. So the Novus Ordo is referring to this structure called the Catholic Church by many, but it's actually an heretical counter-church.
Yes, so but then there could actually come about a state of the world where the entire organization of the Catholic Church would, according to your understanding, not be Catholics, but be kind of an anti-church.
Well, you see with the 1960s, you see this revolution, a heretical revolution with Vatican II. You know that the council you refer to.
Yeah, no, but just speaking theoretically, it would be possible that the entire organization that we call the Catholic Church would then, according to your definition, no longer be Catholics, but kind of be an anti-church or something different.
Well, the difference, however, is that when you see the organization that we call the Catholic Church all up to the 1960s, Rome, the Vatican, etc., all committed to the same teaching and the same dogmas, and they always taught the same teaching, and therefore we see that this is the Catholic Church. But in the 60s, we see the takeover or hijacking of the hierarchy and the structures of the church by these modernists and these heretics, and it's very tragic. By the way, there are more comments by Hassan here. I could just read them if you want, or did you have some remark?
Yeah, go ahead.
In the case of Novus Ordo, they have on record stated that the purpose was to undermine the church. Yes, that is very interesting, very true. That you actually see some of these anti-popes, like Paul VI. He changed the Mass, the very important sacrament, the Mass in the Catholic Church, changed it with a new Mass that actually was a Protestant service. And they're actually close friends of him, telling that his intention with changing the Mass was to make it more Protestant. And you also have Freemasons and communists having an active agenda to infiltrate the church over a long period of time. And there are actually witnesses who testify that these people have actually succeeded. again, there's a huge, many things to be said. There are documentaries, and the website VaticanCatholic.com is highly recommended for more material on this. But yes, that is very frightening, but this is, this is the case. And I think this is what Hassan Ayer is referring to. If you look at those who work closely with Paul VI, he would be an anti-pope since he was a heretic. Yes. So you can draw an objective conclusion from it somehow, even given the Scotsman logical fallacy. Okay, so Hassan is basically arguing that even if we have the problem of the Scotsman logical fallacy, then we can still see that, these people who brought about the revolution, some of them have even stated bringing about the revolution and changing the teaching. Very interesting.
Yes, these are indeed good points. Thank you, Hassan, and also thank you, Christopher, for explaining them. And I think especially it kind of struck a chord with me when you said that the Freemasons and the communists had over a long time the agenda or the goal of infiltrating the church. And you can be think certain things are good or bad that the church did or does. I'm not a great fan I'm not saying everything is good about the church. That's not my position at all. But you can certainly say that it was a kind of a pillar of stability of Europe and Western society for a long time. And there is this great interview on YouTube. I will put a link in the description after we are finished, by Yuri Bezemnov. He is a Russian who worked for the KGB and then during the Cold War fled from Russia and went to the United States and worked for the United States afterwards. And he talks about the concept of subversion, which is this idea that if you have an enemy or an opposing world power that you cannot fight directly, then you use subversion in order to make them weaker over time so that eventually you can win against them. And the idea of infiltrating the church would exactly fit into this general notion of kind of making the foundations of this other society weak. He also talks about how the KGB often sponsored like gay rights movements or Black Lives Matters, like similar types of movements, because Black Lives Matters is a recent phenomenon, but there were other similar movements much earlier. And you give money to small NGOs that kind of destabilize the society and make the climate more difficult and more unstable. And thereby you can weaken this other society, which you cannot conquer militarily. And so I think that's an interesting point there. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember watching some video on YouTube about this former agent. Perhaps we're talking about the same person. He had glasses and white hair.
Yes.
So perhaps you're right, talking about these things. And that's very interesting and also frightening, of course. And yes, when we see at what has happened to the church, we really see this. And there is this American woman who was named Bella Dodd. Have you heard about her? No, so she actually worked in the Communist Party in the 1930s and 40s. I also think the 40s. But then she moved out of communism and left the Communist Party in America and converted to the Catholic faith. And in the 1950s, she testified, perhaps it was in Congress, at least she testified in some formal public setting, that back in the days in the 30s, when she worked in the Communist Party, she had a very specific project to infiltrate the Catholic Church. And she actually managed to send 1,100 radical communists into the priesthood of the church to literally infiltrate it. And she said, and this was now in the 1950s, that now these people sent into the church are now in the highest positions in the church. And this was the 1950s. And then just one decade later, you see this huge Vatican II revolution. Suddenly people say, oh, now we don't need to convert Protestants, and now we can accept other religions. and all sorts of heresies that contradict Catholic dogma. So you really see this revolution. And also the Freemasons. You have specific Freemasons talking about their aim is to destroy Catholicism. The one guy who was named Giuseppe something, I'm not quite sure, an Italian Freemason, and also, by the way, the founder of the Mafia in Italy in the 19th century. I think it was he who said that our final aim is the same as Voltaire and the French Revolution, the destruction of Catholicism. And you have other Freemasons talking about infiltrating the church over a long period of time and eventually managing to get a Freemason on the papal chair itself, and talking about that eventually in the future we'll reach a point where Freemasonic doctrines are promoted under the apostolic banner. And that is precisely what happened. There is evidence that John XXIII, who was so-called elected, not validly though, in the 1958 conclave, was actually a Freemason. And you see all sorts of heresies with Paul VI, John Paul II, and all the way up to Francis today, who do all sorts of heretical things and actually promote Freemasonic doctrines.
Very interesting, very interesting. I was just thinking before that when you said this testimony of this woman, in my mind, I'm always skeptical in both directions. So I was just thinking, well, how do I know that this woman said the truth in this testimony about bringing these radical communists into the church? But then I thought that it really fits together with this, as you have said, like 1 or 2 decades later, then these changes in the church started taking place. And so there is this great saying, by their fruits you shall know them. And so this would give some credit to this story that you have told. And so that was just a thought that I had. And also, I really had to laugh when you said, and not from a positive, but just it's so ironic because this is happening all the time. This idea that the kind of opposite of Christian doctrines should be promoted by the Catholic Church. And this is something that I see happening in society all the time, that people who have a dishonest and evil motives and they don't really have a strong argument for their own position. What they do is they hollow out a certain existing institution that has built up authority over a long period of time, and then fill this hollowed out institution with their own ideology or belief or dogma that they cannot defend rationally by itself, and then just use the authority of this institution to push this dogma onto people. And so I guess this is also really something that we are seeing with this communist ideology happening today a lot. Like Peterson also talks about how postmodernism and radical feminism and transgenderism, this is all kind of communism just dressed in new clothes. Because now you have not the class struggle of the rich against the poor, but now you have the class struggle of the blacks against the whites, and male against female, and heterosexual against homosexual, and you just keep dividing society into certain groups and pitching them against each other, and then it's very evil and destructive. And most of these ideologies cannot really stand on their own because they are illogical and they can easily be taken apart by rational arguments. But that's why they don't debate in a rational discourse, but they just take some institution with authority and then use this or abuse this authority to try to spread this ideology onto people. They are like parasitical ideologies, you could call them, or parasitical ideas. And so I think this idea that you said about the Catholic Church being hollowed out and then used in this way is very interesting.
Very interesting points you brought up there. And as Hassan here says, and tactics like these are not unique. We have seen similar tactics in academia with left-wing ideologies. And that's very true. We see this takeover in academia and other places. And suddenly you see insane ideologies defying common sense being presented as dogma everywhere, all of a sudden almost. And you see this this change, and it's very dramatic, and also how radical the changes are. They really are intense, and also we see this with the Novus Ordo counter church. When it got into the physical structures, suddenly everything was supposed to be changed. All the sacraments, as well as the new mass, and you have a new catechism, a new code of canon law. Suddenly you see people doing things that were condemned by true popes in history, like John Paul II, inviting members of other religions, even pagan religions, to pray to their own false gods. That was completely unspeakable and inconceivable before. And promoting heresies condemned by, say, Pope Pius XI, Immortalium Animals. We see this change, and this change being so radical and intense, and it's frightening, really. So the Catholic Church, it still exists, but today it exists in a remnant, because sadly there are not that many people who really take the faith seriously 100%, but rather compromise it and embrace some heresies. So yes, and also this reflects this general problem of people not having a love of truth, and that is very important that all of us have, that we love truth, no matter if it's inconvenient or politically incorrect. We have to follow the truth, no matter how inconvenient it might be, and embrace the truth. And that sadly is a huge problem that people. Very few people today are willing to do that.
Yes, I really believe that 100% what you just said, that the love of truth, that is absolutely, for me, and I have learned this through Peterson really, or I have realized it through Peterson. I have always loved the truth and striven towards it, but I have never understood consciously that this is the most important virtue and the beginning of all other virtues, and just basically the beginning of everything good, that you need to love the truth and to want to know the truth, no matter how hard or painful or uncomfortable or whatever it is. If you don't like it, if you have to change your whole life upside down, but you have to follow the truth, because as Peterson says so well, on what basis would you build anything that functions in reality except on the truth? It's like if you want to build a car and you make an experiment, and the experiment tells you, well, this way of building it doesn't work. Well, if you just continue and build it anyways, then it just won't work. So, and the same is true for human relationships. Like, if you want to have a good relationship with your wife, you have to build it on the truth, because if you build it on lies, it cannot last. There is no foundation, and the same goes for societies, and it goes for everything. And so I believe this really also goes to this point that we have said before, that these false parasitical ideologies that are not built on truth, they cannot stand for themselves. They always have to, like a parasite, cling to some institution that used to be built on a true principle, and then kind of live off of this, because they cannot live by themselves, because they just fall apart. And Hassan has written some more comments. He said there are also ironically fascist ideologies as well, as there is no room for discussion. Similar tactics are used in authoritarian states by questioning their narrative, so people don't pick it apart due to fear of being cancelled or appearing bigoted somehow. Yeah, that's exactly true. I have said this once, I think, in one of our conversations, that the lie and violence are always, they are like hand in hand. They are like, they cannot exist one without the other. Because if you want people to believe a lie, then you have to use violence to stop them from talking about this lie. Because if they would start to talk about it, then they would quickly pick it apart and expose it as being false. So you need the violence to protect the lie, and then you need more lies to hide the violence, because if you are just openly violent, then people will very quickly despise you and no longer follow you. And that's why authoritarian states always suppress information, because they don't want people to know all their evil deeds that they always do in the night and in the dark. They come and they take someone away and kill them, and then nobody should speak of it.